But that's a need I can't. Even with my wife right here.
Is she as well? Or
no, she's an attorney.
Oh, okay, wonderful. It's not quite the same. Yeah, it's like
No, it used to be, you know, like a
I'm not as well prepared as I was last time. I was so stressed out to analyze my situation. I wish I kind of wish we she was so well spoken on so much of this. Yeah, what to do.
she's great.
Do you have to do? I think you do a fair amount of public speaking or not?
You can tell. Hopefully you can. I've been doing a little bit more of it because I care about this.
Yeah.
Presenting.
Yeah. It's something I like. I do like some media training or something because it's not. I'm very used to like writing the talking points. I'm not as used to being
delivering
doing the talking points, and so that's just something I'm trying to get more comfortable with.
I seem very natural from what I remember from last time.
I was better prepared last time. I don't know. It's been across the I just like. Do you want any more water?
I'm good. Where are you from?
Sorry.
8 years. I'm originally from Honolulu. My wife's from Pittsburgh. So we weren't right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we met in college, but it's a more we moved here from Boston, and we really like Boston. Nashville's really cool. Being here for during the time that we have kids, our kids are 10 to 5, 10, 12, 10, and it's a time to integrate.
All right. Do you see your last name?
It's like pizza without the bun.
Okay. I think I asked you that last time, and of course I forgot.
You can ask me again. So what brought you to Tennessee?
My husband's job, you call it like his quarter life crisis. He like left a secure finance job.
Morning. Everyone hear me? Hi, my name is Whitney Kimmerling. I am one of the co-founders of Voices for a Safer Tennessee and currently serve on our board of directors. I want to start tonight by thanking Rabbi Mackler for hosting us this evening. Thank you. And I also want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Obviously, this is an issue that's important to you, or you wouldn't be here tonight. But also, I know that it's an issue that's weighing even more heavily on all of our minds in today's world with the rise in anti-Semitism. So I appreciate you being here and being engaged and being part of this discussion tonight. Before we start, I want to give you a quick background about Voices for a Safer Tennessee and who we are. We formed shortly after the Covenant School tragedy in March. We're a group of moms who came together. We were heartbroken, and frankly, we'd had enough. And we said, okay, we come from a variety of political beliefs and backgrounds, but there are a few things we can agree on. Our kids deserve better, and our communities deserve better. So how do we right the trajectory that our state is on with regard to firearms in order to get to that goal? And it was pretty evident pretty quickly that there were three policy priorities that we could all get behind, that we all could agree on: dealing with temporary transfer, secure storage, and background checks. And you'll hear more about those as the panel discussion progresses tonight. Fast forward almost 10 months, and Safer Tennessee has established itself as a statewide organization. We have over 25,000 coalition members across the state, spanning all 95 counties. We have a 501c3 arm and a 501c4 arm that allows us to be an education and an advocacy organization. We are Republicans, we are Democrats, we are everything in between. We are gun owners, we are avid hunters, we are people who've never touched a firearm in their lives. We are established advocates. We are people who've never talked to their legislator. Ultimately, we are parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, teachers who all want the same thing, and that's a safer Tennessee. So, as a nonpartisan group, what we have been doing, one of the things we've been doing is having these discussions in panels like this across the state that allow a voice for what is sometimes the lost silent majority, and a way for us to come together as a community and have a respectful dialogue, to ask questions, educate ourselves, and learn what we need to do next in our state. You've got a great panel here tonight. We want this to be a community discussion. As the panel progresses, people will come around with some note cards for you. Write down your questions. We'll come back and collect those so that at the end of the discussion, you'll be able to engage in this dialogue with us and it truly become a community conversation. One final note, you will see some Safer Tennessee badges floating around out here. Please come find us at the end of this panel. Ask us questions about our organization. Ask how you can get involved. We would love to talk with you and answer any questions that you have. I see several buttons in the crowd. If you don't have a button yet, please get one. Get one for a friend or a neighbor. Take them one too. They're great conversation starters. If you're so inclined, we've also got yard signs available for purchase that are a great way to show your support throughout various neighborhoods around the city. One final plug that I have for you: if you are not registered to vote, there is a QR code out there that you can scan, and we would love to make sure that everyone in here exercises their rights at the ballot box. So, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Rabbi Mackler to start with the blessing and begin the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, and on behalf of the temple and its leadership, we are grateful that you are here with us tonight for this important discussion. Makor HaChaim, source of all life, we are grateful for this opportunity to come together, to share and to listen, to ask and activate around those issues that challenge our communities, our neighborhoods, our state, and our nation. Our hearts are broken with pain at the senseless and shocking numbers of deaths caused by gun violence. At schools, on streets, public spaces, sacred spaces, and private ones. Families mourn, children live in fear, and whole communities are devastated. We are here as concerned citizens and community members of leaders and activists and gun owners to help us understand and find a way forward to heal our brokenness. May we find ways to hear each other and work together, finding points of connection among our differences. And let our hands reach out and connect with those who feel alone, those who live in fear, and those who are suffering. Let our voices be raised and ask our legislators to help keep our state safe with policies that are not seen as punitive, but protective to all in our society, especially the most vulnerable. Let us find our voice and a willing heart to work together, if not for our sake, then for our children. Before we begin, we take a moment of silence for all those who have lost their lives due to gun violence and their families who are still grieving their losses and remain brokenhearted. Thank you. Again, we are grateful that you are here, and for our conveners, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Cavendish, who will be moderating tonight's panel.
Thank you, Rabbi, and good evening. I want to thank Rabbi Mackler and the Temple congregation for hosting us tonight. I appreciate Voices for Safer Tennessee for providing this opportunity for valuable research and for this advocacy platform. We're here tonight for a peaceful and civil dialogue about making our community safer from gun violence. As a reminder, we're not here to engage in partisan politics, but rather to seek action and raise awareness that can save lives, keep children safe in school, and improve community safety for everyone. I'd like to introduce tonight's panelists who are going to join us in this discussion. Mayor Karl Dean, Rabbi Mackler, Dr. Allan Peetz from the Nashville Trauma Center, and Erin, the Policy Director for Voices for a Safer Tennessee. I want to give you just a little bit of a factual background to kind of contextualize this conversation. The majority of U.S. adults say they have taken at least one precaution to protect themselves or their families from the possibility of gun violence. 58% have talked to their children or other family members about gun safety. 41% have attended a gun safety class or participated or practiced shooting a gun. 1 in 3, according to Gallup, American adults personally own a gun. We don't know what the exact number of gun owners is in Tennessee because we don't require registration. But polls and indicating data show that somewhere between 47 and 51%, about half, of all Tennesseans have firearms in their households. According to CDC data, firearms are now the leading cause of death for U.S. children and teens, ages 1 to 19, surpassing motor vehicle accidents and those caused by other injuries in 2020. I'm going to ask this first to to the entire panel. Could you each introduce yourselves and share a little bit about what brought you to this moment and this panel, and why does this issue matter to you personally? Mayor Dean.
Well, my name's Karl Dean, and my background is I'm a lawyer, and I served as the Metropolitan Public Defender. Worked in the Public Defender's Office for 16 years after I got out of law school. And then I became the city's attorney, the director of law, and did that for 7.5 years. And then in 2007, I was elected mayor. And I served for 8 years and left office in September of 15. So that's my background. This issue really has been of interest to me for as long as I can remember. I mean, I'm 68 years old now, and I remember very well the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King when I was a younger person, 6th or 7th grade, and it made an enormous impact on me, as it did in the entire country. And the issues of gun control were discussed in different contexts then. It was more about political homicides that had taken place and easy access to guns. And then I became, as I said, a public defender, and I was involved in defending people accused of crimes, and I was around guns and the effects of guns constantly. I represented, scores of people, I don't know, lots and lots of people accused of murder. I've had lots of armed robberies. And so in that job, I saw what guns and violence do to the victim's family, to our society, and to the defendants. And I guess the case that I would just sum it up with is I once represented a 12-year-old who was involved in a drug deal and was convicted of shooting the person who was purchasing drugs at the age of 12. And he was prosecuted as an adult, and there's not any happy part of that story. And then my time as mayor, the issue came up several times, dealing with guns in parks in particular. So that's my interest in this. And then, of course, what happened in Nashville almost a year ago brought the whole community together to bring this issue to the forefront. Rabbi?
Well, many of you know me and some of my story already, but one of the most profound things that happened to me was when I was 15, my mother died by suicide by gun. In one of her darker moments, she was able to procure a weapon in a private sale and change the course of my entire family's life from that moment. So from a young age, this has been something that has been incredibly personal and important to me. We are now actually a gun-owning family. My husband's background in the military made sure that all of us are aware and trained and everything concerning safe storage, but I was told I can't ever say he's the gun owner, but we are a gun-owning family. I speak to you as a mother, someone who, like so many other parents, have to send their children to school with some sort of willful state of denial about all the things that could happen. And of course, they had grown up going to Akiva Day School, which had high security, being a Jewish school and seeming target on many cases. We knew that the issue of gun safety and schools was intimately connected to our family and our community. I speak to you as a native Floridian where two of the cities in which I lived were affected by gun violence and mass shootings, the Pulse attack in Orlando, and more recently, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and now our beloved Nashville. And of course, I speak as a rabbi and member of this clergy staff. As we know in our community, we have to harden our building, and we are fighting hard not to harden our hearts along the way. We have to have armed guards for our schools, our preschool, our religious school, our services. And it's hardware. I mean, they're long guns and not just sidearms. And it's something that's very personal to us because we understand what it means to feel a threat on the outside and have to respond in kind with that same sort of protection. Something that is unique since October 7th for our community is that we are experiencing a staggering rise in anti-Semitism. And a response to that has been our community looking forward to ways that they can learn more about perhaps becoming gun-owning families that may never have considered this. It is a reality that our community is facing. And so many of us are gun owners, but many more are interested in this because they are feeling an external threat. And so we are looking for ways to make sure that they're trained and they have access to safe storage and they know what they're doing in order to, if that is the path that they are choosing, that it's done in a way that keeps the most people safe. I think that we have to pay attention to all those aspects of our community, but that's really where I come from a personal level, from a maternal place, and from a rabbi in this congregation.
Is this working? Can you hear me? I can just speak loudly too. My name is Allan Peetz. I am going to want to use it. Okay. Can you guys hear me back there? All right. Thank you. I'm Allan Peetz. I'm a trauma surgeon at Vanderbilt. I'm also the head of the ethics committee there. And I would say, you asked how this issue what brings me to this issue. I'd say professionally, this issue comes to me more often than I come to it. It happens more and more every single year. I've been a trauma surgeon for 10 years, and I've been in Nashville for about 8. I was in Chicago before that, which is full of guns. It feels a lot more like Chicago every single year. I was on call during the Waffle House shooting. I was on call during the Antioch church shooting, and I was present during when a covenant happened. Unfortunately, I was not able to help, and nobody else was either. In part of what Rabbi Mackler just mentioned, because of the types of guns that are out there. I would say that that's probably what my benefit and what my value is here as a witness, as a trauma surgeon. I'd say the thing that brings me to the actual issue rather than with my professional role is as a dad. I am a dad of a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And like I both of my sons, my 12 and 10-year-old, both of them have found guns in their friends' houses. Now, luckily they know what to do, which is to go somewhere else and to tell me or their mom. But that is the beginning of the story of a bunch of people who come in through the ED who I see all the time. Yeah, that's why I'm here.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you this evening. I'm Erin. I'm the policy director for Voices for a Safer Tennessee, and I wear a second hat. I'm also the policy advisor for former Senator Bill Frist, who's a member of our advisory board. And I come to this issue, I've worked in Republican politics my whole career, the Republican National Committee for Republican members of the U.S. House and Senate, including one House member who was one of the few Republicans who actually was passionate about firearm safety. His father was a police officer, and they saw firsthand how they were being outgunned, how they were seeing a rise in firearm violence. And he would repeatedly, and I was his staffer on this, we would introduce legislation to, address some of the firearm tragedies we'd seen. And unfortunately, at that time, back in 2010 through 2014, we did not see any action there. But I am heartened to be working on this issue again now with Voices for a Safer Tennessee. I do feel like we are seeing some progress on this issue. And, I feel even more compelled now as a mom of 3 with a 6 and 4-year-old girl and a little almost 2-year-old boy. I want to make sure that when they go to school that they feel safe and that I don't have to worry about them.
Thank you all. Mayor Dean, let's start here. You've had a pretty extensive experience, as you mentioned, from the criminal justice side over the past few decades. You, as mayor of Nashville, prior as the public defender and Metro Law Director, throughout this 20+ year period, you no doubt saw the change in our state in relation to gun related crimes, as you said. Can you speak to what you've witnessed and when you have noticed an acceleration in these crimes?
Well, I think the guns were always present. I started working as a public defender in '83, and my clients, who I think everybody would agree, I say this in all due respect, they shouldn't have had guns. And there's really not an argument for them to have guns in many cases, other than probably a sense of personal danger where coming from a neighborhood that may have had higher crime. But they were able to get guns, and that really continued throughout my entire time working in that office up until the 1990s. And I think in Nashville, you've seen various levels of homicide rates. And one of the things I always keep in mind is no one really knows why they go up and down. There's not one factor. Our peak in homicides was really around the late 90s, which was sort of consistent with what had happened in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York, and then kind of moved to cities Nashville size. A lot of that, I would argue, was driven by crack cocaine. But the thing was that people who were selling the crack cocaine, who were involved in that business, all had access to guns, and they all had guns. And most of the deaths that resulted from that were happening within that group. Now, there are cases like the 12-year-old I referred to, and that it is sort of a crack cocaine case, where he had access to a gun. And it was not, so that wasn't the hard part for them. Getting the gun was easy. And then after that, then you get into the 2014, 2013, we had lower homicide rates. I think that happened for a variety of reasons. The drug epidemic slowed down. It wasn't something like crack or Percodan that really got people addicted quickly in a way they had to do something. Demographics change. I think the big driver is demographics, that people have a high crime age. You can be from your teens till around 30, then you get to be around 35. It's a little tougher to start climbing through windows and living that lifestyle, and people stop. So that's part of it. But I think we clearly have seen trends where there is access to more high-powered weapons, which are extremely dangerous and put police officers in a terrible position. And probably the things that, I've always been sort of in favor of tighter gun control rules. But one of the things that really drove that is working so closely with the police department when I was law director and mayor. Every police chief has been in favor of doing more to get a handle on having weapons generally available to the public. So I think that's what's happening. And then you have a big thing that occurred in the last 10 years has been that guns have just become, they're more present because there have been changes in the law, and there's more of hostility, I think, to any discussion at all of gun control or gun safety. Those are the big changes I've seen.
Rabbi, as a faith leader, you've ministered to families dealing with trauma and grief due to gun violence. Is there any hope that this will change? And how involved should places of worship be on this issue?
So as a clergy person, I think we deal in hope. It's what we do, but hope is more than just an optimistic outlook. It requires action. And so on our part, I think that as a community of faith, we have to be able to take action in the ways that are meaningful for real change, and for our obligation to set right what is broken. There are many ways we can do this, but I think we're really guided by that sense that we have the obligation to not only to fix what is broken, but to save a life wherever we can, right? That is actually the Torah portion for this week. You can learn more about that on Shabbat, but we have obligations that are more than our freedoms, more than our rights. We deal in responsibilities, and as members of a community, that is our obligation. We have many ways that we can participate appropriately through activism and policy work and finding those partners that can help. And I think that is an obligation on communities of faith, is to put their values into action. But we can also help deal with some of the other root causes of gun violence, which go beyond the policies that deal with the actual gun safety, but deal with issues of poverty, economic injustice, housing, the crime, all of the other ills of our society that keep perpetuating this cycle of violence, that we can go even beyond that. I also think that we have an obligation, you've heard it said many times here in this chapel, to comfort the bereaved, or comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, right? So we do have to tend to those who are in grief and continually in grief with every renewed trauma. But we also have to make sure that we're not just paying attention to what's happening in our zip code, that the comfort that we might feel in our community. We know that there is hurt and suffering all throughout Nashville and all throughout our state, and that is also our obligation. So we have to do more than just pray in these sacred spaces. We have to find ways to communicate, and this should be, like it is tonight, one of those places where we can come together and have a civil conversation and bring together those disparate voices to find a meaningful and constructive path forward.
This question is for Erin. We've talked about sort of the climate here. Tennessee's in the top 10 in the nation for firearm deaths. A recent statewide survey revealed that 76% of our voters support temporary transfer laws to restrict access to guns for individuals who are at high risk of harming themselves or others. So why doesn't anything happen within the legislature?
Steve, thank you. I appreciate this question. I get it a lot. Why isn't anything happening? And I'm going to actually disagree with that statement because I do feel like something is happening. So I mentioned I previously worked on firearm safety when I was in Congress, and I was there in 2012 when the horrific Sandy Hook shooting happened. And I was working for this Republican member who we sponsored a universal background check bill. And we thought, okay, finally, we're going to actually see some movement on some of our firearm safety priorities. And there was this waiting period. We thought something was going to happen, and then nothing. And it was truly shocking that Congress could not come together at that time. After seeing those 7-year-old kids shot and killed, my daughter is essentially the age that now those Sandy Hook students were when they were killed, and I couldn't believe that nothing happened then. And then, as you saw, obviously, we've seen a number of mass shootings increase in frequency and severity. But in 2022, after the Uvalde school shooting, something changed. Voters really, at that point, kind of had enough. American public had enough. And we actually saw Republicans and Democrats work together to pass the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It was actually led in part by a Republican senator from Texas. And did it solve all our problems? By no means, it certainly did not, but it was the most significant piece of firearm safety legislation we've seen pass in nearly 30 years at the federal level. So that was a step forward. This past year, obviously, we had the horrible Covenant school tragedy here. And I think a lot of us would have liked to see more come out of that from, a legislative perspective, but we did have Governor Lee, who is probably our strongest Second Amendment governor that we have ever had. After that event, he paused and said, okay, we need to do something different. He proposed the order of protection law. And when the legislature said they weren't willing to act on that piece of legislation, he said, okay, let's come back. I'm going to call a special session and we can talk about what things we can get done to improve public safety. So those are things that would not have happened previously. And I do think that's pointing to a shift. And there's some of you in this room here. I was just out at the Capitol earlier today, and we were in a hearing where the leader of the House, Leader Lamberth, was bringing a firearm safety bill and had movingly some parents who had lost their child to firearm violence speaking on behalf of that legislation. It's called Jillian's Law. It's something that we at Safer Tennessee support. So again, we're seeing movement now today, even in the legislature. So we are seeing some steps forward. It's going to take time. It's an incremental process, but I do think we are seeing a shift. And you all are actually a really big part of that. So thank you for being here today. I know a lot of you have probably reached out to your legislators already. If you haven't, please continue to do so, because it's them hearing from Tennesseans that are helping to motivate this change.
Allan, as a surgeon at Vanderbilt, can you describe the impact that this issue has had on healthcare providers? And kind of paired with that, how do you react to the data that gun violence is now the #1 cause of death among children?
So I'll answer the question first. That seems super obvious every single time I'm on call. That it's sort of like, yeah, you can feel it. As far as the healthcare worker thing, I never know how to answer this question because why do you care? Like, I mean, why would anybody care what like I feel about it? What I think might be helpful is to know what it looks like. Because like most of you don't know me, so like how I feel about it. Like, Allan didn't like how he was sad about those things. But let me tell you what happens. So in order to become a trauma surgeon, it's medical school plus a general surgery residency plus I did 3 years of fellowship, so it's 8 years, and then you do an additional year of usually like a junior attendingship, and then you're an attending, like the person who's in charge. So it's a lot of training. You learn a lot of different things. You learn amazing things. I've had some amazing saves. You learn how to save people who are dying. It's awesome. One of the skills that you don't learn, one of the skills that's a part of the job is to deliver bad news. And they don't teach you that. But one of the things that I do on a regular basis is tell people that their child, their husband, their brother is dead. And I am really good at it. And I'm really good at it because it happens all the time now. And that's what guns do. I don't lose all of my patients, but a lot of them come in and there's nothing that you can do. I think that's for me, that's the impact that from a healthcare provider, what I can offer you is sort of a witness. This happened at Covenant. I was at the hospital when Covenant happened, and those children were shot with a firearm that we all know we can't do anything about. And that, in my mind, is something that shouldn't happen. Not that any of you care what I think should or shouldn't happen, but I can tell you what happens, and you can make your own judgment about those things. I hope I'm answering your question, but I don't know that you care about how I feel about it, but that's what happens.
Mayor Dean, you've seen the impact of gun violence in communities, and in so much of the Nashville community, from education to juvenile justice to grassroots community efforts. Can you speak to the aspects of this issue that have impacted the Nashville community specifically, and what are you hoping that may change in the legislative session right now?
I mean, I guess one of the reasons I brought up sort of the history of the homicide levels in Nashville is that this has been going on for a real long time. And it's happened in other parts of the city. It's happened where, families, particularly in impoverished communities, are terrified that their children are going to be killed either because they hung around with the wrong person or they got involved in the wrong sort of transaction, or they're a bystander standing in a park when somebody shoots, or some kid brings a gun to school and drops it and it goes off and it hits somebody near them. This has been going on for all my adult life and before that. So this sort of level of violence in urban America is a concern to, I think anybody who's been a mayor in a big city, it's always at the top of your list of concerns, public safety. And nothing in the city works without public safety. If people don't feel safe, they don't go to school. If people don't feel safe, they don't stay in neighborhoods. If people don't feel safe, people don't invest in the community. So it's just fundamental to it. So what I would like to see from the legislature, and I'm sort of, I just finished a book called Gradual. Let me recommend this. It was by 2 criminologists who were really behind a lot of the work that was done in New York City to bring the crime rates down there. And their homicide rate dropped dramatically. I mean, it went down from, over, I think, 2,000 a year to, 300 or 400 a year. So they've had some success, but one of their points is that we have to be willing to accept, if we're going to make progress, that some things take time, that some things will happen more gradually. And, there are such outrages that occur, like the Covenant shooting. I think you respond to that, at least most people do, by saying, we got to do something now. This cannot happen again. We're outraged. Something needs to occur. But we got to build to get there, because we live in a society, in a state where there are different opinions about things. So what I would think would be critical is to see progress as we move forward on safe handling and storage of guns, obviously. I think the temporary restraining order type of approach, in terms of not allowing somebody who there is a knowledge that the person has a mental illness or some sort of problem, that they're going to be particularly dangerous, that they have access to weapons, and particularly weapons that are high-powered killing devices, is critical. And just let me throw one thing out. If you think about Nashville, these are not cases I've been involved in, but I think I'm speaking accurately here. The Waffle House shooting involved somebody who had mental health issues, and somebody who let that person have guns or not do anything to take those guns away. The Covenant shooting involved somebody with issues, and guns were not taken away, and people were kind of nervous about it. So I'm just speaking from what I learned in the newspaper. And one from the distant past here in Nashville. John Hinckley came through Nashville when he was stalking Jimmy Carter before he shot Ronald Reagan. He came through Nashville and was stopped in Nashville with handguns. And he was in Nashville specifically because Carter was going to be here. These things occur over and over. And I think that would be a dramatic step, particularly with the proliferation of high-powered rifles, is if there's an ability for families, for friends, to say to somebody, they shouldn't have this stuff. Somebody, please step in and do something. I think that would help immeasurably.
I'd like the rest of the panel to kind of weigh in on, is there anything that in this legislative session that you're hoping might change?
Sure. So as Mayor Dean said, it definitely is a incremental process. It takes time. Many of y'all probably remember the wine and grocery stores bill. That actually took 7 years to get across the finish line. That was a big win in the legislature. And who opposes wine and grocery stores? And so it's something that, for firearm safety, where we have a lot of differing opinions, and it takes time to bring people together on these and realize that there are kind of pragmatic, evidence-based solutions that we all can agree on. That takes some education. That takes, these conversations that we're having here right now in these, safe, sacred spaces, where folks can kind of ask the questions and have more meaningful answers. But as far as what we're kind of actually anticipating this session, it's a combination of things. There's some smaller, steps forward for progress that we are, advocating for. I mentioned Jillian's Law earlier today. That's something where an individual who, if they are deemed incompetent to stand trial, they would be added to the prohibited purchaser list so that they aren't able to purchase firearms. Right now, those individuals are able to legally buy firearms. It was the Belmont student who was shot this past November was someone who incompetent to stand trial and was let go, and 12 days after he acquired a firearm and unfortunately accidentally killed this young woman. So that is a piece of legislation we're supporting. It's also going to be some work on defense. There's going to be some bills still that will increase guns in what are currently gun-free zones, like schools, places of private business that we know are pending, that we are going to be following very closely and have very serious concerns about, because if it's a gun-free zone, we don't want to add guns to that space. We just had the bill filing deadline a few days ago, so we are still kind of going through the legislation and determining our strategy. But it is going to be things like that, of improving our background check system, the governor's budget just last night included some additional funding that we are supportive of that would help address a serious backlog in our background check system. Doing things to, essentially shore up the foundations that we are ultimately trying to then build upon a long term for improved firearm safety laws. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought there a little bit, but you all are kind of understanding what I'm saying, that this is a incremental process, and that, if you all want to follow us on our social media or sign up for our emails at safertn.org, we kind of send out weekly emails that do kind of provide some updates on what is going on at the legislature. And we can also, for those who want to be a part of our legislative presence strategy, come down. We do encourage folks to come down and listen to the hearings and kind of see these bills in action. It's actually interesting. They really kind of, you see the debate actually happening with people coming and testifying. It's a lot, it's kind of how the sausage is made, right? And it's interesting to be a part of that. We love when folks join us there, because then you can, we'll give you all updates when you're there on what we're expecting next. And so it's something that I'm learning as well as I'm going, but would love to have you all be a part of that process.
Ask this of Rabbi Mackler and Dr. Peetz. Some pro-gun organizations have pushed back. We saw this in the special session against any proposed gun reforms. They believe it's a slippery slope, that if anything passes, it leads to more restrictions. What would you say to those who don't want to compromise or even listen to any reform proposals on either side?
I think I would try at first to bring them into the conversation to find if there are actually points where we can agree. We may not agree on some of the policies. If someone finds safe storage laws punitive, let's figure out a way to help create laws that are protective and not seen as punitive. I think we can find ways of incentivizing through law and legislation and policy change, and not just make people feel like things are being taken away. Let's figure out a way to work together. But if they're not even going to come to the table, we have to figure out other strategies. Hopefully, by that invitation for conversation and partnership, we can actually move forward. And I think being able to have disparate voices come together is the only way that we're going to make something whole. You don't make something whole by the same piece trying to fit together all the time. You have different pieces that have to come together to make something whole when it's broken. And here we have a real broken system and a broken society that needs each and every piece to be able to come to work together. So I think by encouraging people to have those conversations, bringing together people from different political sides, to hopefully figure out a way that we can do this together. Something that I'm hoping is not the solution or the only part of a solution, is to treat just the symptoms and not the cause, right? I think having bulletproof backpacks or armed teachers is not the issue here, right? That's not going to keep everyone safe, right? Kids in schools, if you know anything about a kid in school, they put their backpack down and don't touch it for the rest of the day, right? So we need to really figure out ways that can be work together for meaningful change that go beyond, hardening spaces, and really talk about what are those root causes.
Did you say you wanted me to? Oh, okay. I'm not a politician. So this is a dangerous question to give to me. I guess I don't know the answer to this question. I think that this is the crux of the challenge, though. I mean, I'll answer this less as like a trauma surgeon and more as an American. That part of what's great about America is that people get to disagree. What sucks about this issue is that people die from it, and this tremendous amount of suffering that I think we all feel, whether it's directly or indirectly, or everybody knows somebody, I imagine, that's been affected or is directly affected by this or will be directly affected by this. The stakes are high. That's not an uncommon. Mayor Dean could comment more intelligently on this than I could, but I don't think you'd disagree to say that that's not a particularly firearms aren't a particularly unique subject when it comes to American history in terms of our ability to have hard conversations about hard things. I guess I would say I'm trying to not answer your question and answer your question. The answer is I don't know. What I would suggest is that oftentimes when I'm trying to have a conversation, specifically because people ask me about this, about firearm issues, and they ask me about my own personal experience, and what I have found, I think, is that sometimes providing my own experience with it, which as a trauma surgeon, is sometimes helpful, but oftentimes it's more helpful for me to ask questions. It's more helpful for me to figure out where it is that they're coming from, because it's easy for me. Luckily, my wife is not here to completely agree with me, but it's easy for me to disagree and feel like I'm righteous in doing so. And oftentimes, what I find is that either the others, whoever I'm talking to, softens if I am just legitimately curious, which is hard to do when you have a strong opinion. I have a hard time doing that. But to try to understand the other side, I think helps come up with solutions. I don't know. Did I dodge your question well enough there?
As a journalist who listens to people dodge questions all the time, you did.
I did a good job. All right,
You did a great job.
That's great.
I want to ask the group one more question, and then we've got some questions from the audience that I think are really some really thoughtful questions. What can people in this room do, and people who are watching online as well, do to take action and show their support for any sort of legislation? And if you have any sort of like specific ideas around this, please share. Let's just go straight down.
Well, I would say get a yard sign tonight. I mean, one thing I talked about working together and gradual stuff, but you can't let the effort die. You can't let the tension be taken away from it, because other people are not necessarily going to pick up the baton and carry it. So, I mean, I will just say, driving today, I drove down one street in my neighborhood where almost every house had a yard sign. And believe me, that had an impact on me. I think that has an impact on, certainly, I guess I was a politician. I'm now a public servant, but it has an impact on people who run for office to see that. And I think you have to keep moving the ball forward and working on it, and this issue is important enough, it's meaningful enough that you got to keep it on the front burner. I mean, you don't have to yell at people, you don't have to speak with moral outrage all the time, but this matters. And so keep it on the front burner, get a yard sign, wear a button, participate when you're asked for help. That's probably the most important thing you can do.
I would say as well, and this community knows the impact of phone calls and letter writing and gathering people to reach out to those legislators for specific legislation and asking them specifically what you want them to do. That is part of what I know many of you in this room have already done. But I think continuing to do that and trying to find perhaps a partner who is not of your same background politically, in the community, finding someone who maybe you disagree with and working toward getting some partnership there. There are people who are interested, even if they seem as different from you, more than you can imagine, that really want to be able to also have some more safety in our community. Whether it's in cars being stolen, or the police officers who don't know what rooms they're walking into and how dangerous those environments are for the people who keep us safe. From all across the city, there are people that want to work on these issues together, and so finding spaces that's possible. But there is nothing like those phone calls and those letters for that direct ask to support or stand against particular policy suggestions?
My answer to this is always directed actually to parents who have children, and it has a dual purpose. Well, and the suggestion is to actually ask every time that you have whatever, my kids hate it when I call them play dates now, because I could get-togethers, whatever the cool thing is that you're supposed to say. Whenever you get-togethers, that you ask if people have firearms. Now, that is directly for the purpose of like a safety conversation, but it also gives it, I have found it to lend itself to do exactly what Mayor Dean kind of was alluding to, was to have a real conversation with another person about their views about firearms, or specifically like, how do you store your firearms? Like it serves both a practical purpose of finding out whether or not you want your kids to have a get together or play date or whatever, or how, but also I have found it almost universally leads into a very interesting conversation, whether or not you're on the same side of it or not. So that's a little bit esoteric, but that's my answer to that.
So a few things. So obviously I already said this, but make sure you're contacting your legislators if you haven't already. Probably a lot of you live in Davidson County, and so your elected officials are maybe are Democrats, and so are already supportive on these issues. And so if you have friends or family in rural counties, in areas where that we maybe don't have as strong of a presence, please engage them on this issue, have a conversation with them, because ultimately the majority of our counties in the state are rural. Our elected officials are disproportionately representing rural areas, and there's this perception that this is just an urban issue, that this is just Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga's problem and nowhere else, and that's really not the case at all. In fact, the majority of firearm deaths, 54%, are actually suicides, both here in Tennessee and nationwide. And those disproportionately impact older white men, veterans, and our rural communities specifically. Our rural areas see a suicide rate, like in East Tennessee, for example, it's double the rate of that in the Memphis region. So we have a statewide problem on this. So we need your help in engaging people beyond the Davidson, County area on this issue. It's also something that women have been disproportionately energized and engaged on down at the legislature. I see a lot of men in this audience, and I love that. Thank you all for being here tonight. And so we need your voices to be lent to this effort as well, in large part because if you look at the makeup of our legislature, they are it's disproportionately men. And so they want to see their own, see themselves also reflected in the folks that are coming down there who are concerned about this issue. And then also, I know Whitney said this at the beginning, we would love for you all to make sure you're voting, especially primary elections. You'd be shocked by how small of margins or how small the numbers are for folks that turn out for House and Senate primary elections in this state. And these are the people that are deciding our laws. It's really pretty shocking. And so make sure you're doing that as well. We've got the QR code out there to register to vote if you're not registered. And finally, kind of what Allan was alluding to, secure storage of your firearms. If you're a gun owner, make sure you have it safely stored somewhere where it's locked, out of reach of children, ideally unloaded. So we really encourage you to do those things. And those are just and also go to safertn.org and register to join our coalition if you haven't already.
Can I say one other, because I'm speaking with our community here largely, if this is something that is on your mind, perhaps to become a gun owner or to take a safety course, we have members of our community who are willing to speak with you. They're instructors, so that if you have questions and you just want more information on a practical level so that you know what to do for safety's sake, you can come to see me, you can come to any of the clergy, because we can connect you with those people. We know that you're largely responsible and you want to do the right thing, and this may be something that's on your mind because of what's going on in the world. So to make those thoughtful decisions with the most information that you have, we do have plenty of people in our community that are willing to talk and help.
skip to a lot of really, there's a pile of really thoughtful questions from this audience, and so thank you very much. I want to try to get to at least some of these. Let me ask anyone here, maybe Mayor Dean, since you're a lawyer, you might weigh in. Do you think that the court ruling today for the mother of the Oxford, Michigan shooter being declared guilty of negligent manslaughter for her son's issues and mishandling of a gun, do you think this will be a positive move? And do you think this might result in parents locking up guns?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that people can be critical of the verdict, the arguments to be made about, shifting criminal responsibility to a third party. I mean, when I saw the verdict, and I didn't follow this case real closely, but I followed it close enough to know that I took the verdict as sort of saying, if you're aware that you have somebody who has it very close to you, somebody who lives in your home, and they're having mental health issues, and you're giving them a gun, that's a problem. And I think the next step is not necessarily to go down the path of criminal law. The path would be I would think, would be this idea of taking the weapon away temporarily or whatever. But if you have a child or somebody who's in your home who is going to hurt themselves or is going to hurt another person, and they are starting to accumulate weapons, you got to do something. And I think that approach makes a lot of sense to me. And I think for families, it gives them an answer to the question of what do I do? It's not like they can just, they're saying, I'm against you now, son or daughter, because I'm going to call somebody to have these guns removed. They can say, well, that's the law. I got to do it. I'm sorry, but I'm going to follow the law. And that, I think that's needed.
Anybody else? Okay. I've got 3 or 4 questions to this effect. One of which one says, how much does the NRA play into legislation? Another says, how can you compete with the NRA? And there's a few more like this. Does anybody maybe Erin want to talk about the role of specifically the gun lobby in Tennessee?
Sure, happy to speak to this. And this is actually something we have looked at. We did some polling kind of to look at, I know Steve cited some data about the strong support for the temporary transfer law here in Tennessee with 76% support. A number of polls are seeing similar data with GOP primary voters having strong support for expanded background checks, secure storage of firearms, temporary transfer laws. We did some of our own polling as well, just to see if we could see those same results. Again, looking strictly at GOP primary voters, and we found that to be the case. And then we also asked the question of if they were affiliated with a firearm advocacy organization like NRA, TFA, which is the Tennessee Firearms Association, or another organization. And the rates were actually surprisingly low. And we looked at kind of several key several key districts, and found it was only about, and the highest rate, 10% or 11% for NRA membership. The TFA barely broke 1% at its highest. So we are seeing, actually, I think there's this impression of disproportionate impact that they have. And Rabbi Mackler mentioned, or Whitney mentioned the idea that we are the silent majority, because what really, truly, the majority of citizens really do support kind of these pragmatic changes in firearm safety laws, that it's not taking away rights, it's just kind of restoring responsibility. And so this is part of our work, is doing education with members, with voters, just letting them know that this is not an issue that's going to get you beat in a primary, because we looked at the data, your voters support it. And also letting voters know that, your voice does matter on this, so you need to be showing up and voting and engaging to really see that shift happen. So does the NRA, the TFA play a role? Certainly. It's, part of the reason that we are trying to be really thoughtful also about these approaches and finding bipartisan support that Republicans, Democrats, gun owners, hunters, veterans can all get behind, so that we can really work together for a true solution.
And just a note, the NRA's original mission largely focused on gun safety.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the history of guns in the last 20, 30 years in America, but it started out as being very active proponent of gun safety and public education about that. So, I mean, I do think most gun owners in Tennessee are responsible people, and I think it's something you can have a conversation about.
There are a couple of different questions along this issue. Someone writes, "This is only one part of the gun problem. I'm very concerned about easy access to automatic guns and how they kill so many people so quickly. Can you please speak to that? What about limiting such weapons?"
I'm all for it. I mean, again, it goes back to what can you pass? I mean, today in preparation for this, I looked at some things online, and there is an argument being made that I think they mentioned England and Norway and Australia, of countries that have responded to mass shootings by more tightly controlling access to certain weapons, and much tighter for almost all weapons, but certainly for automatic rifles and automatic weapons. And those countries saw dramatic reductions in mass killings and other homicides. But that's a tough one politically.
It is a very tough one.
You really mean semi-automatic weapons, not automatic weapons. There's a big difference. Automatic and machine gun, those are extremely tightly controlled, where semi-automatic weapons are legally available. Let's just use proper terminology.
Correct. Semi-automatic weapons, correct.
Sorry, my fault.
Question. None have mentioned enhanced penalties against criminals. Why should you make it harder for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves, loved ones, and family?
sorry, say it again?
The question is about focusing on regulations for law-abiding citizens as opposed to criminals, and why Voices for Safer Tennessee is approaching it this way as opposed to enhanced penalties for criminals in these gun cases.
Sure. So I'm sorry. The question is for enhanced.
Yeah,
Okay, wait,
it is focusing on the gun side as opposed to the criminal side.
Well, there are laws. I mean, there are criminal laws that in Tennessee, and I'm assuming they're all still in effect, that if certain felonies are committed and there's a firearm used in the commission of that crime, there's an enhancement. There's even, I don't know what it is now, whether it's 5, 10 years, but there's generally an enhancement when a firearm's involved. And this goes back, to my days as a public defender, which is, you're going back to the 80s and earlier. And I guess the idea is that the legislature decided back when they passed the law that when somebody brings a weapon to the commission of a crime, the danger of somebody being hurt goes up greatly. And I guess if that's what the question is about, whether you have these enhancements in criminal law, that particular person, at least according to the district attorney and the police who have arrested them and indicted them, that person is probably not a law-abiding citizen. I mean, the jury will ultimately determine that, but they have been accused of committing a crime and having a firearm.
Erin, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. So the areas that we are focused on are areas that we've got, like I said, bipartisan support, that we've got evidence-based data showing that they actually make a difference in reducing firearm violence. So our 3 priority areas are expanding background checks with the goal of ultimately having background checks on all firearm transactions, so universal check system. That's been shown to reduce murder rates by over 6%, as well as reduce firearm violence in those states that have implemented those. On temporary transfer laws, which Mayor Dean has spoken about, those have been shown to reduce suicide rates by 14% in Connecticut, which has enacted it. It's had it on the books the longest. In Indiana, those have reduced suicide rates by about 8%. And then in another study that was recently released in 6 states that have implemented a temporary transfer law, they actually saw that at least 10% of the cases that were being reported were threats of mass violence, where they were able to intervene and actually remove firearms temporarily from individuals who were a threat to themselves or others, making those mass threats of violence. Our final area of secure storage of firearms, again, this is an area that, when implemented properly, reduces, in particular, child death from accidental shootings. We're 3rd in the nation right now for accidental shootings by children, where they are unfortunately accessing guns that are not properly secured. So we've started with these because we have data showing that they make a difference. And we also found that we've gotten bipartisan support for those. So that's where we're kind of really beginning. That's really where our organization is foundationally working to advance priorities.
Thank you. I want to say personally thanks to everyone who attended here today, and to Rabbi Mackler and the congregation for hosting us. We really appreciate it. And I want to leave it with Rabbi Mackler here at the end.
And I know they'll have some chance for discussion out in the lobby and for materials. So as we leave today, may we be led by our conscience and our convictions, that we find a way to meet one another with the clear goal of mending what is broken in our society, to bring healing to our state and to our nation. May we come together as a community with courage, and through our civil discourse, always model respect, upholding the dignity of difference and the divinity we find in diversity. May we always remember that unity is not uniformity, and that there can only be wholeness, as we said, through those disparate pieces and parts coming together. May we celebrate those incremental moves forward, and through the difficult work of compromise and collaboration, pave the way forward to progress and possibility for a more peaceful and safer Tennessee. As we say in our tradition, Adonai tzedcha uvuecha me'ata ve'ad olam. May God guard all of our going out and our coming in always. Amen, and we wish you a good night.
Yes, you too. There were some harder questions there that I'm not perfect. You were, I appreciated your levity. You had some good, yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Yes, ma'am. Hey.